Hello all, and welcome to Living Conversations, brought to you by Living Bankside. My name is Thomas.
And I'm Keanna Gordon.
Joining us today is Natalie Bell, a local community activist with a long career helping young people and local communities in and around the Borough of Southbank. Natalie is currently the head of youth and community programs at Coin Street. Natalie, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To start off, Natalie, could you tell us a bit about what you do here at Coin Street?
I've been linked to Coin Street for longer than I should say. My current role is Head of Youth and Community Programs, and I look after a large team of community workers and youth workers, and we're delivering services for residents of the local area of all ages, but mainly older people and young people. We put on activities across 7 days a week and meet different needs, and we're very active and responsive in the community here.
How did you get into something like that?
I sort of fell into it. I first of all trained as a fashion designer and had a shop unit at Gabriel's Wharf, and Gabriel's Wharf is part of the Coin Street site. So I actually started my relationship with Coin Street as a commercial tenant. It was one of the very first original pop-up sites. So we're talking about 30 odd years ago. And I was there for 3.5 years, and then I sort of learned along the way that Coin Street built housing, and that they did lots of creative and arts activities at the time, like festivals. They also have a lot of commercial development going on, which they use to make money to feed into the community side of things. I was fortunate enough to be moved into one of the housing co-ops. So Coin Street has a great reputation for building housing cooperatives, which are quite rare. And it's social housing where people run the housing themselves. And I found myself living right next to where I worked and becoming a community volunteer within the housing co-op. So as part of the agreement, you have to sort of do voluntary work. So I picked up a lot of the social work within the cooperative, and I was living in the Oxo Tower Wharf in Redwood Housing Co-op. So it was quite a strange setup because there were over 80 households all moving into a warehouse building that had been converted into social housing. But from the outside, people thought that you lived in a millionaire's dwelling. And at the time, if you can imagine, the Southbank wasn't what it is now. It's very quiet. There was no London Eye, there was no Tate Modern. You couldn't even walk along the river side without having to come back onto the road. So it was a very remote sort of, a bit desolate really. But I got to know a lot of families, and it really started a shift in myself and being aware of other people's needs and being part of a really thriving community. And so I decided to start a career in youth work, and then I started doing a lot of voluntary work with Coin Street, being qualified as a youth worker, then becoming a lecturer in youth work, and then taking the job that I have now after working in about 6 or 7 charities along the way. So yeah, I've been involved in youth and community work for over 30 years now.
Wow. And that's in that time in the VCS, the voluntary and community sector, you've been predominantly based in Southwark, so you must have seen a great deal of change on the Southbank alongside the skyline and the London Eye and the Tate Modern. How do you think the place has changed in your time here?
It's literally gone from one extreme to another. So I think this area probably had quite a thriving community feel, and then it became sort of much more commercial and more corporate. And I think like Coin Street had to fight to be what it is and to get the land that it has right on the Southbank. But at the time, the site was just destitute. There was nothing there. I think the board who fought for that land would probably be, really shocked if they knew that the Southbank was going to become this other entity that was really almost like one of the most busiest parts of London, because when they were given the land, they got it for £1 million, and there was just nothing there, and it was an old bomb site, and there was a disused factory. And you can't really imagine that now, because it's such a thriving, vibrant place, and it's become like a real mecca for all the arts, because all the arts and cultural quarter is on the Southbank. So it does attract a lot of tourism and a lot of visitors. So I think for the community, it's quite hard to be seen and heard. There was a statistic quite a few years ago where if you walk around Waterloo, there's probably only 1 in 7 people that actually live in the area. Like the other 6 people are just trotting through. They're either coming to work and leaving, or they're passing through because it's such a transport hub, or they're coming to see something as a tourist and just enjoying themselves. But with that, it means that the local people start losing their amenities. So when I started volunteering, we'd lost the local library, we'd lost like proper shops. A lot of the shops were turning from useful shops for normal people into high-end coffee shops, and everything was becoming meals for one. You know, so if you were a family living in the area, it was quite hard. And the schools weren't thriving either. A lot of families were moving further away from the area. And I think the initial issues that Coin Street took on, it's almost like we're going through another phase of that now, because it's so overdeveloped and built up. And, you know, it's almost become too successful in a way. I mean, if you're canny, you can sort of make it win-win for everybody, but you really need to make sure that the community voice is as heard as the commercial and development voice. There needs to be, you know, skilled people sat around the table that can negotiate the best deals when things are changing all the time.
You know, you've mentioned it previously, but sort of on London and its, you know, ever-evolving nature, you know, a lot of things have changed. Particularly in recent years, there's been a lot of negative stigmas directed, particularly south of the river, directed at young people specifically. This hasn't been your experience. So why do you think this idea sort of perpetuates despite what reality shows?
I think generally there is really poor press about young people anyway. Like, you don't hear many good news stories about young people. It always tends to be the negative stories and the sensationalist stories. I think, unfortunately, the press and social media have so much power and control over what people read and hear. It feels very unregulated, and it often, to me, feels highly irresponsible, the way they describe young people and sort of really weight the stories so that they get a higher readership. You know, it's become really clickbaity, hasn't it? So it does, like, the media more good to have bad stories about young people, because obviously people will get, you know, sort of like to try and search out more and, you know, click around and all of that. So I think it's a really difficult environment for young people to be seen as positive. I think the government also sort of uses stats about young people to really further their own agenda. And because young people tend to not have a clear voice, lots of decisions happen that really, really affect them, but they just have to sort of suck it up and get on with it. And I think over the past sort of 20 years in particular, I've seen youth services just become very fragmented, decimated. The lack of investment in young people generally, and also the advocates for young people have not been sort of listened to. So particularly since COVID, I would say that young people have had a really raw deal. And politically, it's almost like a tool to be used, you know, the stats about young people and the plight of young people. So one political party will use that against another one without even really thinking about, well, what's good for the young people in all of this. Just reflecting back on myself when I was younger, and we're talking a long time ago.
Not that long ago.
You know, when I left school, I had so many choices, and, you know, it didn't hinge on having money. You had the right to go to university for free. You had the right to have support in between university terms so that you didn't have to sort of run around trying to find a job. You know, you could get benefit to just keep you going. Young people have had so many things taken away and it hasn't been replaced by anything. So there's just been this sort of constant stripping. So I think it's really difficult for young people to achieve and to really feel hopeful and optimistic about their futures. And I also think that, you know, the whole world of work is so different now, but schools and education and the government are so far behind trying to skill up young people for the workplace now. So there's this huge mismatch. So I'm not surprised that things aren't going well for young people. I think coming back to your point about the negative press around South London, in the old days when I was a practicing youth worker, everybody used to talk about Brixton and Peckham and the violence surrounding Brixton and Peckham. And I think it's because they had the biggest estates and the lack of investment going on there. And there was almost an explosion of youth violence that happened about 20 years ago. And then the whole postcode wars, and you know, it just became extremely inflamed. And I think they didn't handle it very well at the time. And I think, you know, even now, the police struggle to deal with youth violence. I understand that some of the stats have gone down, but I also understand that a lot of young people don't report. So, you know, the statistics are quite meaningless. And if you're going to base all of your new ways of working on statistics and not work with those communities and really get inside those communities to try and come up with, you know, really long-lasting plans that are going to deal with deep-rooted complex issues, then it's never going to be done correctly in a political sense. I ran a youth forum called SC1 United, and the whole ethos that we had was you have to learn to lead yourself before you can lead others. And we had a leadership program that was aimed at primarily young black men, and obviously it was voluntary. They came to our activities because they wanted to. They weren't referred there, they weren't told to come. And we did some amazing work with these young people, and the sort of lack of reoffending was really evident because we had like a 90% rate of young people not reoffending. But unfortunately, you know, we didn't get funded, we didn't get sort of supported enough. And I think there's this practice of not keeping things going when they're doing really well. You know, you're constantly fundraising. It's always got to be seen as new and shiny to get the money. But there's other projects that have been running really well and doing really well, but they still don't get any support, and then they shut. And yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame.
I mean, definitely, you know, as a young person myself, I've noticed it is very difficult to get opportunities out there nowadays. You know, a lot of it has become who you know, how much money you have, sort of the affordability of it. A lot of people don't have access to those resources anymore, and it is quite a shame to see. And even, you know, I work in youth work as well, seeing other young people, sort of seeing the struggles and how easy it is for them to sort of go down certain pathways simply because those opportunities aren't available. And I think that definitely adds to sort of that view that young people aren't the best and that we don't seize opportunities, where the reality is there isn't an opportunity to seize. So I think it will be interesting to see going forward sort of how the government, you know, issues funding and who sort of gets the opportunities and how that is run, because it's one thing to have youth centres open and it's another thing for them to just be empty buildings where children just sit versus having active opportunities and having activities for them to be involved in. So I definitely think that'll be interesting going forward. But one of the things that I like to pride myself on in being from Southwark and as a young person is its diversity, whether that be in age, race, culture, religion. What would you say about that in terms of your youth work and your activism? How has diversity sort of shaped your views?
I think it's definitely something to be celebrated and something to be really protected as well. I think in this current climate, especially when we've had the, you know, marches going through Southwark, I think it's really changed the atmosphere. And I think there's other things going on globally as well that people are really taking notice of. And, you know, what's happening in America really influences people in the UK. It always has had that relationship. I think it's a time for people to really be aware and conscious. And I think it's not a time to be complacent. You know, it's really hard, isn't it, when people feel uncomfortable or fearful about celebrating diversity and really being open about that, because you're more aware now that there are people that really don't want that to happen and are really taking action to stop us being a country or a borough, you know, that is sort of truly looking at equity for everybody. It's a very complicated issue, but I think for myself, I've really shifted in being hyper aware of like everything that I can do or anything that I can get involved in. Is like, how can we make it really overt that these are the values that we want to promote, and to be truly like welcoming and focused on making sure that people from all different backgrounds can get involved and come in a safe sort of environment. You know, I can give examples. You know, we've only started doing really overt Black History Month celebrations at Coin Street, and really purposely inviting everybody in the neighbourhood to come and to make it very public and very open action that we do. Whereas before, I think lots of other organisations would lead on activities like that. And I think, you know, Coin Street's like, no, we have to do our part to really hammer home that this is the way that we want things to be. And we want everybody to feel valued and loved in their community and appreciated. So that's where it's just not a good time to be complacent and to sort of assume that everybody else can do that and we're just going to carry on being a little bit sort of middle of the road about things. I think the other thing I would say is like, I'd say the plight of young people is like the barometer of society. So if young people are not thriving, there's something definitely wrong with society, because guess what? They become adults when they're 18, you know, and yes, they'll be useful then and they'll earn money and they'll pay their taxes and they'll stop being such a pain. Do you know what I mean? But it's like, you have to put everything in and offer young people every opportunity possible to develop in every way that they should, to be a positive citizen in society. So if you shortchange young people, you're causing even more problems for everybody else in society. And I think it's really important that we don't demonise young people and we don't infantilise them either. I think there's so many things now you can't do until you're 18, and loads of employers who would have employed young people at 16, 20 years ago are now so kind of paranoid about dealing with young people that they sort of say, oh, we'll only take you on when you're 18. And then they're caught in this trap of not having any work experience and then applying for hundreds of jobs as adults and being told, well, you know, you've got no experience and we're not going to hire you. So it becomes a vicious cycle. Something else that used to happen was this real push for enterprise and skilling up individuals to do their own thing, because some people aren't cut out to do a 9-to-5, or they don't sort of fit into even just the normal school system, and then they don't fit into the usual workplace. And I think having opportunities for young people to choose, actually, I'm going to go it alone, or I'm going to freelance, or I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I don't really see that there's enough of that opportunity for young people generally either. And I think intergenerational work is really important. I think we compartmentalise age groups too much. It's really important that people of all ages mix and share knowledge. I think because life is so different now and it changes so much, I think older people can learn a lot from young people if they take the time to spend time with them. And I think young people can, you know, get involved in volunteering not at 18, but much younger than that, and to learn how to sort of be around older residents and be more mindful that they might be more physically fragile, and understand why, older people might not understand the life that they lead either, because their childhood was so much more different. So that's definitely some areas that I think are lacking.
Yeah. On that intergenerational exchange, traditionally that took place in the workplace as young people enter work, and they would have many more experiences with people of different generations. But as you've alluded to, that's not particularly abundant in opportunity at the moment. We've just the other week seen the release of the initial stages of the Milburn report, which, while obviously these statistics are not indicative of the picture across the country for young people, it is looking like youth unemployment has risen now to over 1 million for the first time in decades, and it will cost in taxpayer revenue around £125 billion. But the social cost of that is obviously much greater. You're kind of on the front line in the VCS sector, working with young people in that sense. What has gone wrong?
I'm not sure if a lot of this has had to do with since COVID. It's just been really like this big void and this big gap, because I'm sure it wasn't as difficult pre-COVID. I know it was heading towards lots of cuts and lots of other things, but I do think during COVID there was this big sort of fallout for young people in terms of the young people that were going through their education and missed out so much in their development. And then I think there's a lot of remote working now. And I think a lot of things have become automated. So many young people who might have gone and got a Saturday job at Tesco's, there's hardly any opportunities there, because when you go to Tesco's, it's mainly older adults that are running the tills, and then more than half of the tills are automated. And I can see that that's happened in lots of different areas where, that would have been a young person's first entry into the workplace, would have been a Saturday job. And I think a lot of things have just quietly melted away. So there's just this big gap. Even down to sort of like communities not being as close. You're not hearing so much about teenagers babysitting, doing paper round, doing, odd jobs. And even in this area, I know that a lot of neighbours don't talk to each other and they don't know who each other are. People are transient, they move on quite a lot. So I just think there's just almost like a perfect storm going on with lots of things that have disintegrated that just make it really difficult for young people to even get a foothold into the workplace. If I was going to try and improve things, I would, bring back a lot more investment in apprenticeships and looking at that 15 to 18 year age group and how to bridge that gap for young people. I think you almost need careers advice at school again, because we used to get it, and I'm not aware that that's happening much. You need more enterprise things going on, maybe a really big mentoring sort of program as well, where businesses are purposefully like developing relationships with their local young people at a much younger age and, partnering up. You'd think with the academy system, because that's now being run like a business, that should be happening more naturally, but I'm not sure that it is.
And that's obviously private sector involvement and employers themselves doing a lot more, but the government being aware of these challenges now at both a local and a national level. They've proposed more apprenticeships, but these things are drowned in bureaucracy and they take a great deal of time. Do you think at the minute the government's doing enough at all levels? Do you think young people are supported in the way that they should be?
No, absolutely not. No, it's trickled from central government down to local government. I'm sure, we probably know lots of services in Southwark that have just closed. They've just become too difficult to run. A lot of small charities, closed over COVID, and there hasn't been enough investment, or, the government hasn't supported the voluntary sector enough to really set things up for young people. And I think, it's really tough, because I've heard the rhetoric of it'd be great if every young person has a trusted adult to speak to. And I think also the other big issue is mental health, young people and mental health. I think that is improving, because I think they're realising it's going to cost you even more money in the long term. And I think this is why I use the word investment, because you're investing to save. If you invest in young people, you have adults that have a much better quality of life and, you know, more ability to look after themselves for longer. So by taking things away from that sort of like generation, you're just asking for more problems. Yeah. You're asking for more, you know, adults that have mental health issues or just not be able to ever get to go to work. So yeah, and I think there needs to be more incentive for young people as well. There used to be sort of schemes where young people get £30 a week to help them get to college. And I've heard locally, there was a youth organisation that did some interviews with young people about what was the incentive to stay in education or, you know, get to go to your work placement and things like that. And it was literally £30 a week. When they took that away, a lot of young people who lived in very, you know, tricky circumstances at home where they didn't have any money, they just couldn't get on the tube and go to college on the other side of London, or, you know, say, yes, I want to do that work placement and I'm going to pay to go and do it, you know, in an office. So yeah, I think the government could help by giving 16 to 19-year-olds or, you know, a specific age group access to some funding that is for their personal costs, especially if they're coming from a family that already has financial issues. Yeah.
Are you optimistic of a future with things like that being able, in the sense of the government being proactive and sort of investing, as you mentioned, to save in the future? Because like you said, young people are the future adults, and I think that gets missed a lot of the time, is one day the children that you're not giving opportunities to will be the adults that you're seeking to hire but won't, because they don't have experience, etc. So do you think that there is a future where all these things will come back into place?
I hope so. I think generally everything is so unpredictable at the moment. It's quite difficult to really see where anything's going to land, and our current government is quite wobbly. So and we're going through so many changes. I mean, I really hope so. I mean, I'm glad that the headlines about young people are persistent, and I think everybody agrees that there is an issue that needs to be resolved. And so for me, that is a starting point to start really pushing and campaigning for things to happen for young people, because everyone's listening at the moment. But it's just whether young people are involved in that process. That's what matters to me, because if you're going to put lots of money into projects, but actually it's not the right project, or you're just going to waste that. And I think, you know, that the government really needs to listen to young people first and foremost. They really need to understand the issues and the problems and not just guess what they are, or hire lots of consultants to just do a desk, you know, research and say, well, the statistics say X, Y, Z, so let's do this, that and the other, and hope that the problem gets better.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because in my line of work, so I work alongside Southwark Council as a youth advisor. So a lot of our work is youth-based, but it also includes when there are initiatives going on. For example, organisations, the council, whoever, will come to us and ask, what would young people think? And we sort of act as the young person, or they'll even ask us to go out and sort of engage and do sort of that outreach element. And I think even actions as simple as that are so powerful. We'll sit in meetings and they'll tell us things and we're like, that's boring. No young person's listening to that. Change this, add this to your presentation. It's just these simple tweaks that sort of amount to make big changes, but there's not enough people taking initiative to seek out a young person's perspective. So I definitely think, as you said, now is the best time to sort of speak up, because people are paying attention and people are listening. But we've got the new local administration in Southwark, coalition led by the Green Party. I know they've gotten the attention of a lot of young people lately, but what are you hoping they offer to them?
I think, like what you're describing, I hope that they start listening and they start really engaging. And I think that's a big challenge, isn't it? Is getting young people to be more aware of what power they can have and to mobilise their voices. and to really introduce them to allies and advocates that can really help push their agenda in the right way. Yeah, I think it could be quite an exciting time for young people, actually. I think there is part of me that says that I believe that young people aren't getting enough education around how to be political with a small p. I don't think they really understand the framework and how they can be active. And I really hope that young people might start getting more involved. I mean, I really think it would be interesting to see if the vote came down to 16, because then I think, 15-year-olds will suddenly think, well, next year I can vote. So
Yeah.
I'm more inclined to research, what does that mean? How do I vote? Whereas leaving it until 18, when you're already very disenfranchised with everything and very aware of the negatives of everything that's going on and less likely to be involved because you think that it's pointless. I think somewhere along the line we've got to ignite that passion within young people, that if they come together and they start, being very proactive and wanting to be part of their community, that could have huge benefits for themselves and everybody around them.
Certainly. There's no elegant segue into this, but we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the Natalie Bell building in the Tate.
Okay.
When speaking to Natalie Bell, and we were just curious how that came about. How do you feel about it now? 8 years on, your name is still there in the boiler room. How does that feel?
It still feels very strange. I thought I should be used to it by now, but I'm really not. And every time anyone mentions it, I sort of go, oh, okay, we're talking about this one now. It came about through a project that was done with an artist from Cuba called Tania Bruguera, and she's a highly political artist and has done a lot of very maverick things in the art world. And she has a phrase that she calls art utile, which is useful art. So she was commissioned to come to Tate Modern, and she wanted to work with a group of local residents to set up a project that was very much led by them and that had a very socially political angle to it. So there were three things that happened. She put the group together. She had lots and lots of workshops with them. I wasn't part of that group. I was quite ignorant of it all. And they decided they wanted to do a project that she had done elsewhere on a temporary basis, which was to rename a building, not after somebody who was rich or famous or a historic figure, but someone who was quite ordinary. So this was a challenge, and the residents spent a long time thinking about who locally could be the person's name on the Tate Modern. She also wanted to cover the floor of the turbine hall with this special paint that goes transparent when it's heated. And she wanted an image underneath the paint of someone who had been helped in the community. And she asked me to choose the image of a young person that I supported through the youth forum, SE1 United. So his name was Yusuf, and I met him when he was 18, and he had fled horrific circumstances and from Syria, and ended up on the streets in London and had already been homeless for a few weeks and was in a shelter. We worked with him at SE1 United, and it was really an honour to work with him and help him get on his feet and see him flourish and see him go to university and really become a massively proactive person. So his face was put on the floor, and then it was covered in the paint, and Tania hoped that hundreds of people would lay on the floor and reveal his face, but we could never get it timed so that enough people laid on it at the same time. So eventually there was a grand reveal, and they took the paint off so that you could see his whole face if you went up on the upper levels of the Tate and looked down, because it was 30 metres square. It was huge. Wow. It was massive. And there was also a room where you could cry on the corner of the turbine hall and just think about people that were fleeing circumstances and wars and famine and trying to get a better life. And there was chemicals in the room, so you could sit and think about people who were displaced all over the world. And then there was a digital number that was counting the amount of people, like in real time, who were being affected. So it was a very multi-dimensional piece. And I remember on the opening night, my name had just been put up on the wall of the turbine hall, and a plaque had been put up on another level. And it was really subtle. And people came hurtling down the slope, expecting to see, you know, something huge and artistic and really obvious, but you had to look for it. So, you know, you sort of stood there and you couldn't really see that anything was different, because the floor looked the same. Like the floor only looked different if everybody laid on it. My name was in the same font that the other writing had been on. So you had to sort of really look at it and then wonder what was going on. And then the room was just a very quiet room in a corner, and, you know, the numbers were just quite small. It was like almost like a treasure hunt. You know, you had to really work hard to work out what was going on. So that would have been, I think, eight years ago. It was about 8 years ago. I was really shocked when I had a meeting with Tanya and the curator from the Tate and the director, and they basically said, you know, this is the project, your name's come up, how do you feel about it, can we put it on the building? And it took me about half an hour to decide, because I'm quite a background person, and I sort of thought, what does this mean? I don't really go on social media, I don't really like a lot of attention, and I also thought, what does it mean for the people that I work with? I don't want my face everywhere, and then I go into someone's home and I'm doing a safeguarding case and they're in pieces and I can't do my job because they look at me and they're like, oh, it's that woman that was in the paper or on the news, you know. So I was like, I'll only agree to it if I can be still quite private and mysterious. So we sort of went ahead with it, and they said it will probably be up there for possibly a year, but it's been a long time and I've had to really try and get used to it, but I can't get used to it because it's still quite strange. But I think primarily I agreed to it as a political statement that community work, there's millions of people who do community work and most of them are volunteers, and they're hidden in the community and they're not really taken much notice of. And I wanted to represent that it's fine to be recognised for things that people don't usually take much notice of. And I'll never forget that Tanya was so delighted when she met me, because she said she didn't know who I was at all. She didn't know anything about me. She just kept hearing the name. And she said, I'm so glad you're not white. I'm so glad you're not rich. And I'm really pleased that you're a woman and that you come from an immigrant background. And I was like, well, that's great. Let's celebrate that. That's celebrating diversity, you know? And so I was quite proud of that a lot of the things that I found really hard in life are now things to be recognised. And, you know, it was a turning upside down. So I was quite honoured and happy to be part of that.
Amazing.
I mean, definitely, by no means are you ordinary. And I think the fact that the community spoke and said, no, we want Natalie's name, that says a lot. And, you know, you touched on it as well. Even Yusuf being chosen by you, he's not ordinary either. He is special in his own right, in the fact that everyone sort of has their own story and their own experiences, and sort of you get to see their journey. And I think especially in a profession such as yours, you see so many stories and so many different backgrounds that it must be beautiful to see. Yeah. This is what can come of it. In light of speaking on, you know, community-based work, is there any local organisations you'd like to mention?
Oh, there's loads. I mean, I'm here because of my connection with Living Bankside, and I've been an advocate for all the work that they do for a really long time. Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the best part of being a community worker is all the people you meet. It's all based on relationships and individuals, and the coming together of individuals to try and change things for the better for other people that, you know, sort of need support or just need to be connected in. I think, especially in London, it's a really, really lonely, isolated existence if you're not connected to people and you don't have your family here. So yeah, I think there's lots and lots of organisations that we work with, like Blackfriars Settlement. Coin Street obviously has loads of partners with Oasis, and just thinking, I don't want to miss lots of people out because we probably work with about 20 or 30 organisations on a regular basis. I mean, St John's Church is a strong partner that we work with. And I think it's that sort of mix and balance of working with schools-based organisations, faith-based organisations, and working where people naturally go, you know, being alongside the GP and making sure that you outreach and that you have those sort of like signposting services going on. I think the most important thing is to really develop a network and a net that sort of supports people in a holistic way, because people have so many different issues, you know, and not one organisation can really be the magic answer for one person and their whole life, you know, and their family. So it's really important that you are connected and that you do work together. I mean, there's some brilliant corporate companies as well in the area. We have attracted a lot of good companies that will come and do, you know, lots of pro bono work. And I think you have to look at communities as a whole. Like sometimes there is this them and us thing going on, but some businesses do better community work than community organisations that have become quite corporate in their approach. So I think you sort of need the whole 360-degree holistic sort of approach to anything that you're doing to improve things.
Well, Natalie, thank you for being so generous with your time. Where is Coin Street and what can people expect to get up to?
So Coin Street is based on Stamford Street in SE1. We also have a centre called the Colombo Centre where we do a lot of our community work. We have a big nursery and a thriving support team for families. We do have lots of opportunities for designer makers to come and set up their businesses at the Oxo Tower Wharf and at Gabriel's Wharf, but that's going to be changing in the near future. We are working on developing the site, and there should be a leisure centre coming in the next few years and some new housing, so watch this space. Yeah, but it's sort of like a little urban village because we've got parks and housing and community facilities and sports facilities. So yeah, check us out.
It's been a pleasure having you, and this has
Thank
been
you.
another episode of Living Conversations brought to you by Living Bankside.
Thank you.